Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, good day. Welcome to the Level Set. I am Larry Fields, and this morning I'm joined by the Mike Jones and the incomparable Dr. Charles Alexander. Happy J5 anniversary to all the noops out there. Some of my best friends are noops. Uh,
Same here.
but we want to get right into it this morning as we as some of us celebrate the ascension to of one of the decent individuals that occupied the POTUS position in the United States, Mr. James Earl Carter, a nuclear physicist, nuclear scientist that was the president of the United States. And I'd like to get thoughts from the panel on the works and the presidency of James Carter, or Jimmy Carter, as we finally called him, the peanut farmer. So, Mike Jones, if there's no further delay, please, what are some of your thoughts on when you think about Jimmy Carter?
I first want to separate Jimmy Carter, the man, or the human being, from Jimmy Carter, the president. Okay, because at just the personal human level, he may be the most decent man ever to be president of the United States. Uh, uh, so, and a testament to his humanity really is how he lived his life after he left the White House as is much more a reflection of who he was as a person, and and it's unusual to find somebody with that sense of decency and moral grounding in uh, in an American politician because they fundamentally uh, don't usually happen, and especially to get to that level. However, as a as a president, I think Jimmy Carter is also the beginning of the unraveling of the Great Society and the New Deal, uh, because fundamentally he was a politically conservative, moderate conservative Southern Democrat with who wasn't tainted with the racism of the South. So that's why I'm saying you separate his humanity as a person from the political environment that he came from. And the reason I start with with him as the unraveling of the New Deal and the Great Society is Ronald Reagan may have fired all of the air traffic controllers, but Jimmy Carter was the president that deregulated uh, the airlines. Okay, that if you go to most countries in the world, they have national airlines, may have one, may have several, but that's considered infrastructure for how you get around the country and the world. Jimmy Carter was also a businessman, and he was uh, prone to deregulation. So there, the beginning of the unraveling of a more regulated form of capitalism really started with him. Now, one could argue legitimately that there were things that had calcified over time that probably needed reform, but and that was probably his thinking. But if you think about um, the airlines are no longer, they're just a commodity that we buy a ticket to a plane or to get on a plane to fly to someplace else, as opposed to being part of the infrastructure of how we move around the country and the world, just like public transportation. So what you're looking at is a whole beginning of the deraveling of that. And he kind of set his politics kind of set the table for Clinton and even Obama because both of them fall into the same, I'll call it moderate or liberal, neoliberal capitalism that is business centric, where the efficiencies of capitalism become the first priority, and whatever happens after that is secondary. And I think that all starts with Carter. Richard Nixon, for example, as crazy as it sounds, was not that kind of president. I mean, Richard Nixon gave America the Clean Water Act, the 8/8 set aside programs were Richard Nixon's response to Lyndon Johnson's Model Cities program. So what you had was a real up until through Richard Nixon, you had a activist uh, uh, federal government that was directly involved in improving the lives of Americans. It obviously didn't get it right, wasn't perfect, but that was the arc of the activity. And it began to change with Carter. Now, you didn't feel it with Carter because he was a decent man. But after Carter comes Reagan, and the unraveling really starts. But by then, the Democratic Party, starting with Carter, has started to shift to be, how would I say, receptive to that message. And that unraveling of the New Deal was always on the agenda of right wing American oligarchs since Franklin Roosevelt was the president, and Roosevelt's response to them was, "They hate me, and I'll revel in their hate." And then you move on to the Carters, the Clintons, and the Obamas, and they're trying to figure out how to accommodate that. How do we all get along? And Clinton will even argue that there is a role for the billionaires in a civil society that leads to a better day. And uh, Franklin Roosevelt, a scion of the upper class of America, would have said, "Are you crazy? Okay, I know these people. They my people, and you can't trust them with shit." So that's my take on Jimmy Carter. One as a person, one as a president.
That is an incredible take, and I don't think that's a take you'll find anywhere else in the marketplace. And I'd like to get your response to that, Dr. Alexander.
Thank you, sir. And good morning and happy J5 to all of my fraternity brothers, the members of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. And thank you two gentlemen for recognizing our founder day. When I think about this, I think about it really just in the manner in which, sequentially in the manner in which Mike Jones just explained. And I think I'm feeling like that's how we got to do it. So like, if we're going to look at a president, we got to look at before him, during him. We got to look at his presidency, his time in office, and we got to look at what preceded him and what came subsequently. And I think that is part of our difficulty in managing our political strategy. And so for many folks, many of us, the thing is, Jimmy Carter, he liked Black folks, and he elevated a lot of, Black folks into his cabinets. When when he got into some issues, who was that with Andy Young? He replaced Andy Young, but he replaced Andy Young with another brother. And so when he was a governor of Georgia, he elevated a lot of Black folks into state positions, and I suppose into his cabinet too. Um, he made many statements and I suppose actions actually with regard to, so we look at when he ascended to the governorship, we're literally coming out of the civil rights movement, and so doing things to reaffirm the work that had been done previously. I don't think we always look at things sequentially. I think we're very, very present focused. And so when we look at Jimmy Carter and we say, okay, he did this, that, or the other for Black folks, well then, why was there a need for Jimmy Carter in the trajectory of Black folks? And so if we go back to, folks doing stuff for Black folks, at the presidential level, I think we see suicide. I think we see assassination. And so we go all the way back to Lincoln. He's doing too much for Black folks, assassination. And we don't really get nobody doing much for Black folks. Grant did some things. But we saw the repeal literally of Reconstruction, and then 100 years of combine the nadir and the modern civil rights struggle to get Kennedy, presumed to be doing moving too far left, assassinated, replaced by Johnson, who folks then start calling the first Black president. And depending on what you read and study, and it becomes clear that folks working with and in support of Nixon helped to sabotage a lot of parts of Johnson's administration. And then we get from the Nixon administration, from people close to him, was that the primary targets of the Nixon administration were, the anti-war protesters and Black folks. And so from Nixon, we get the war on drugs, which disproportionately impacts Black folks. And so then we get Ford, who then forgives Nixon, and he don't do jack for Black folks. And then we get Carter. And then out of Carter, we get Reagan, and we start to see those things, those things that they wanted for us and that they continue to want for us, starting with Reagan, launching his presidential campaign from Philadelphia, Mississippi. And we start to see from that point forward kind of the fruition of Nixon's war on drugs. And then we see that all the way through, all the way up until, we get any relief for that. We get during Obama's presidency. And then in response to Obama, we get Tea Party, and then Trump, but again, because we don't think sequentially, we try to figure where does this come from? How can America be like this? It's like that every time. That's the enemy. Is that our relative gain? It just enrages the enemy. And so the enemy has a constant goal. We keep thinking that every time we elect somebody into office that we have arrived, and we don't continue with whatever the charge is. And so, that's why I wanted Mike to kind of provide that retrospective so that we could have some context for, so one of the things that we were talking about in the beginning, in the pre-production, and what kind of this idolatry. in this moment, we're going to talk about Jimmy Carter, the person, and this, that, or the other. But we got to be looking at it in terms of how we got to him, what's happened since then, and how did his presidency impact us, good, bad, or indifferent. And that's not really what we do. When people die, he was such a good man. That Jimmy Carter, and ain't saying nothing substantive about how we've benefited. And I'm not saying that we haven't, but I ain't saying we have either. And so, but it got to be more than this, this reverence and this reverential praise for his 4 years of office, and he's the best post president ever. And what does that mean for us? And how do we start to develop that structure? And that again, and that's why we're here. And that's the whole point of the level set. Again, it's like, how do we break this thing down into its component parts?
Let me ask you to interject one thing. You skimmed over Philadelphia, Mississippi. Someone may be listening to us for the first time. If you could speak about the significance of that, of Reagan starting his campaign in Philadelphia, Mississippi, as you go
Yes.
along, with respect to this continuum and the wholesale evaluation of lives as it relates to our community as well. Please.
So with Reagan starting his presidential campaign, first of all, I mean, he was already, a ruthless and racist governor of California. But when he goes to Neshoba County and he goes to Philadelphia and in Mississippi to launch his presidential campaign, he goes to the place where Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner were disappeared and murdered. And and there he speaks of states' rights and all of those things. So he's in a space that is clearly about the old South, and it's clearly it is hostile, historically hostile, and probably still hostile today. And so he's going there to establish himself as as the offspring of the Dixiecrats, of those Southern national elected officials that helped even in the battle to kind of reshape things. So let's say like for the GI Bill, those Southern folks who were able to get the GI Bill administered at the state level so that Black folks were still disproportionately receiving, those benefits kind of depending on where they lived. If they lived in the Midwest or the Northeast, and maybe even the West, maybe they got some GI Bills. But those that live from the Midwest down, almost nothing. And so Reagan goes there to establish himself as that type of politician. And that's the exact type of politician that he was. And that was, and that's a part of how we have to look at him. And we have to look at him as a response to Jimmy Carter.
Absolutely. That's incredible. I want to add this one nuance. Welcome, Jerry L.
Thank you. As my family was saying, Alabama, he went down there to establish himself as 100% cracker.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Dr. Alexander,
Mike Jones was going to say something.
Yeah, I'm going to go directly to Mike Jones, but I want to add one wrinkle to that, which was a comment that you made about these individuals, no matter who's in office, having the same agenda, which is an anti-Black agenda, and us, once we get into office, and I'm paraphrasing, trying to engender your sophistication, but once we it's not even get into office. Once we get a guy, we tend to let our guards down and allow and just to wish for something without an ongoing agenda. And my point is, and I want to talk, I would like to open this up for all three of you all. What about us is so wants us to so readily take our foot off the gas and to just assume that we are part of this, whatever it is in America. And, when we continuously have individuals that have one agenda and that agenda is anti us, no matter what it is. I mean, what is it that allows, that we want to, feel a part of this thing and to take our foot off the gas in terms of proffering our own agenda and in some hopes that we're becoming, enmeshed in this thing.
Uh, I'm going to, from this is my perspective. I'm going to clarify the presidents of the United States for us as Black people. There have only been two presidents in the history of this country that have ever advanced the interests of Black people over the objections of white people. Ulysses S. Grant and Lyndon Baines Johnson. That's it. Okay? Ulysses S. Grant is the reason you had Reconstruction. And the Reconstruction was done over the objections of obviously all white people in the South and the Northerners who didn't care. But he committed to that, and it worked for 8 years. He leaves the presidency, and things regression to the mean. Lyndon Johnson, voting rights, the Civil Rights Act, a whole bunch of other urban development housing programs. All of that was done over. Matter of fact, Lyndon Johnson created model cities to bypass white mayors in urban north because he knew white mayors would never deal fairly with Black folks. And Lyndon Johnson did this not necessarily because he was an overwhelming liberal, but he's just a good politician. He thought he was president of the United States overwhelmingly because Black folks voted for him. And when you look, and the way Lyndon Johnson operated, if you do something for me, you got a bag coming. So we ain't got to make it no high standard moral thing. We just got to say he was a professional politician who respected people who supported him. But the other thing, but those are the only two. Every other president, including Obama, has whatever they've done on behalf of Black people, have tried to make sure that they don't offend or rile up too many white people. And so historically, they'll say, well, that's the best I can do. And I'll replay for you in the audience in the movie Selma, the phone conversation between Lyndon Johnson and Dr. King. And they were talking about, I think they were talking about the Civil Rights Bill, and Johnson would say, well, I'm kind of stuck. And King said, well, you got to do it. You got to do it. And Johnson said, I can't do it. He said, but why don't you make me do it? So that's the game. He said, I need you to make it impossible for me not to say yes. So what you really do in politics, and this is the way it works, and everybody out there listening ain't got a clue. But sometimes I tell Gerald and Charles, I need you to put your foot in my ass so I can put my foot in their ass. Okay?
Mhm.
So that's the game we playing. Okay?
And that's the game that we don't want to play.
And
If,
that's the
you know,
game we don't. That's the game we don't want to play. And
but that's the game we have to play. You're absolutely right. And quickly, what's your thought on Abraham Lincoln?
fuck Lincoln.
Fuck Lincoln.
Yeah, fuck Lincoln. I'm with. I'm with. You ought to read what President Drucker says about Abraham Lincoln. He said he was a white folks president. Literally, that's what he said.
That's what Franklin Douglas said.
That's what Douglas said. He did what he did.
He said, "Make no mistake about it."
Make no mistake about it.
He did it to save the white population. It had nothing to do with the black population.
Right.
Union.
And he said he was, and they was cool. Him and Lincoln was cool. Okay. He said, but they president. He was not president.
I just wanted you to make that clear because a lot of people will see him as one of those ones that was consequential for black people.
As long as we keep getting our understanding of American history for white people, we'll always be fucked up.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So that's white people telling you that's what Lincoln did. That's like
I understand.
That's like them telling you that the reason Martin Luther King was there at the Washington Monument in August '63 was because he had a dream. No, he wasn't. He was trying to get
right.
He was trying to cash a check that had bounced.
He was checking insufficient funds.
That's it.
Mark, insufficient funds.
But they don't discuss that at all. But Martin Luther King.
No, more importantly, we don't discuss that.
We don't discuss it.
I don't expect them to discuss it.
Exactly.
But
that's the problem. You absolutely right.
What's our excuse?
What's our excuse? You absolutely right. What's my excuse? Yes, you absolutely right.
That Gerald, what you just said is profound. You personalized that. What's my excuse?
It is. Because that's what it boils. That's what it kind of boils down to, Larry. Because we know better, and we allow for so much foolishness to go on when we know better, especially in a city like we're in St. Louis. We know how much foolishness is going on here right now.
And we refuse to do anything. And so, my question remains, why are we so apt and willing to take our hands off the steering wheel the minute that our neck is not in the yoke?
I think it's because we want to get along and not be the troublemaker. We want to get along in order to be successful. And we have a lot of people in our community now who have various positions, in government and in corporate America and in public sectors. And they don't want to lose those positions. And they know if they really start talking the truth to our people, they will not be able to maintain those positions. And they are more concerned about themselves than they are about the whole. And it goes back to what we talked about last week with Kwanzaa. It goes back to collective work and responsibility. We don't want to take responsibility for the whole, and we don't want to do the collective work. We want to be accepted and have it easy, because it's difficult to be on the outside. And I know personally how difficult it is, and I know, what it's like, especially when you become blackballed by that community.
Well, it's funny you said that. Yesterday, guess what I got in the mail? It was, I think, more than likely the last circular from Cori Bush as she's exiting office. And she stated, as I wrap up my time in Congress, I want to take a moment to reflect on all we've accomplished together. Together, we've secured over $2 billion in federal investments for St. Louis, including $41 million in community project funding. We've helped thousands of constituents navigate casework with federal agencies. We've introduced landmark legislation for housing, racial, reproductive health, education, labor, and climate justice. And most importantly, together, we've shown the world who St. Louis is as a community and change makers dedicated to equality, to equity and justices, not only in Missouri, but across the globe. So, I think that speaks to what you just stated. And and once again, we talk about the violence of the actual violence of assassinations, as brought up by the Mike Jones earlier. But the violence has many shapes and forms. Putting you in your place is a violent act, and for
Mhm.
speaking on some on things that you ought not speak on, they violently sent they being an establishment that spent $18 million in the 15th market of the United States to get to buy a seat, in essence.
To buy a black seat. That's what's so concerning about it. We lost a black seat dedicated to us. We lost a black seat. And we don't have black representation in it right now.
Well, now it's a seat for Israel. Um, so the thing that we often like to say is our greatest strength, certainly at times can be, an Achilles heel. And so like we talk about our spirituality and da 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 da. Well, that could be a problem. And so, and it could be a problem from this perspective. And so, and this is where cross-disciplinary study matters. The theory of the case conceptualization, the social theory, all of these things are born out of they're born out of a group's social, cultural, developmental, ethos, right? And so if we say fundamentally, we use, and what I like to use is Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop's two cradle theory. And so for those of you who don't know, Dr. Diop is a noted anthropologist, and he and Theophile Obenga are very critical to our understandings of the central place that Africa serves in the development, the origins and development of mankind. But in the two cradle theory, he posits that life starts in Africa, and then you have successive migrations, which all of this stuff has been pretty much accepted. You have successive migrations. A group of Africans go up and get stuck behind, I think it's the worm glaciation, and over a period of thousands of years, 20, 30, 40,000 years, lose their melanin, become white. All right. Now, the things to know central to this conversation is that folks from the southern cradle are hospitable. They are xenophiles. That means we like people. We like different people. We like all people. That is our nature. Why? Because we're from the continent, and the continent is what the continent has always been, and that is abundant. So we're born into a place. We evolved. Man was created and developed in a place of abundance, right? And it's kind of out of that abundance that there is some security to explore, right? And so then we go and da da da, and so then that's what happens, and we go where we go. But those people who evolved as a result of that glacial period and came back down came from a barren and desolate and harsh space. And one of the fundamentals in terms of their interpersonal relations is that they're xenophobes. They don't like nobody else, and they don't share. They don't play, in short, they don't play good and play well in the sandbox, right? And so we have, if you buy into that two cradle theory, and I do, you have, a group of people who are fundamentally open and welcome. That's us. And then you have a group of people who are fundamentally aggressive, harsh, and hostile. That's them. To use Mike Jones, we the lions, they the hyenas. And so our own sense of, cooperative and collective interpersonal relations are fundamental. That is a part of our ethos. That's why we always talking about family and community to start with. It makes us vulnerable in relationships with these hostile people. And so when we achieve something, it's kind of the same both ways. So and we talked about this a little bit last week. When we have an individual from the community achieve, we celebrate because we say that's us. And then when we have a collective achievement, we celebrate because we say that's us. When in reality, we need to be looking at this thing sequentially and looking at, why this matters relative to where we came from and where we're going. But that would be my, that would be my take on our fundamental challenge. And that's why I was saying before we were talking about idolatry and, my thoughts there is that you can't help it here in this capitalist piece because it is a very material piece and it's about what is immediately available to you. And, given the, propaganda and this, that, or the other, it's easy to fall in love with, who's ever in front of you, on the screen, on, whatever the source of media, particularly when you don't have nothing, or if in comparison, you don't have anything, because that's the way that the system is designed to work, because it's seeking to generate in you a want for those things that you don't have. That's what drives this economy. And so these are the places, in which we are trapped. And that's kind of why we respond the way we respond, to these various battles. And it's like each time, unfortunately, it's like we're starting all over because we don't look at this thing sequentially. And we don't, we continue to struggle with that pattern recognition. And but part of that is that what has occurred over the past 50 years is that our number of folks who are living in abject poverty as a percentage of our population has decreased, but poverty has gotten worse for those who are stuck in that abject poverty, right? And so we have people kind of, across the economic strata, socioeconomic strata, and that does kind of distort things for us, and it also kind of distorts who we feel like we should be beholden to, not just as political figures, but as, good citizens and good people of the community and good people of the family. Like, who should we be most concerned about? And, that has started, our thoughts on that have started to change. When you see that people are making huge investments in places where there's already huge investment, as opposed to making huge investment with those who need us the most. And so that would be my take on things. And that's kind of where our fight is. And I think that too, has an impact on how we see a Jimmy Carter or how we see any president, because, we really just looking for somebody who will move toward. And the fact that they will move toward at all, a lot of times for us, is a win, as opposed to whatever it is we might get or not. And that, again, that our willingness to move toward it has at one and the same time really kind of been, our strength and relative weakness.
Charles.
And the flip side to that, Mike Jones, would you just give me 1 second because I want to
sure, no problem.
get directly back to you. we talked about interdisciplinary learning and education. The flip side to that, the religious historians and writers, and I'm going to quote Derek P. Gilbert here, and Last Clash of the Titans, states that the truth with respect to the spiritual realm is that there isn't just one supernatural rebel in terms of Satan. He says there are at least hundreds of the fallen. They're very old, they're supernaturally intelligent, and they hate you. They really hate you. They want to kill you and everyone you love, and useful idiots in the media, Hollywood, and the education system have been doing PR for these foul creatures for generations. I'm not going to go a whole lot into depth into that subject, but as we go forward, I think that you raise cogent issues that we need to study all aspects of this issue, and let's spit out the bones. Mike Jones, please.
Yeah, I think Charles has raised a really important concept, and that is an anthropological understanding of people and where people come from. Okay, basically, for most of up until the 1900s, everybody, I'm gonna say everybody in the West, because there's a different epistemology in Asia. So, is the world is 6,000 years old, and that's because that's about how old civilization is. Because human civilization didn't exist until agriculture was invented or discovered, that we could grow food so you didn't have to be hunter gatherers following herds or chasing food. And we didn't have private property till we got civilization, because nobody built anything. You didn't have nothing what you couldn't carry following the herd or hunting for food. And that the Africa he's talking about is not the Africa you see today, that the Sahara Desert that you see in North Africa, or the desert part of North Africa, didn't exist 40,000 years ago. Might not have existed 6,000 years ago, and that was all green space, and the Mediterranean Ocean wasn't there. So when people walked out of Africa, they walked over to Europe. I mean, and the further north they is, you had these glaciers, the ice age, and all that kind of stuff. And the notion of scarcity creates a different culture than the notions of abundance. So you're right, where I don't want to say life is easier, but where food and those kinds of necessities are not scarce, people have tendency to be more in community. Where they are scarce, people are in competition for their individual survival, and everybody who is not you fundamentally is an enemy. So you really revert back to what Hobbes and other social philosophers call the state of nature, and so there's could be multiple states of nature. So in a place of abundance, the state of nature can be, hey, it's pretty cool here. In the case of a place of harsh weather, not a lot of food, no ability to grow food, have to hunt for it, you create a different culture and a different mindset. And we are genetically products of these cultures, okay, that fundamentally, as a species, like all species, you breed out you breed into the most dominant characteristics that suit your environment. So somebody that is their genetic history is from a hostile environment will ultimately become hostile people. And they're going to be genetically predisposed to be hostile people because that's what it took to survive in the environment that they were in. For somebody who was genetically the descendants of somebody in a much more abundant environment, their dominant genes are more social, etc. But as long as we don't understand that evolution about human beings, as long as we stuck with these myths about Adam and Eve and the snake in a garden, that kind of shit, you can't make no rational sense out of your condition if the way you're defining reality is a function of origin myths. And they all myths. They shit people make up because they need an answer to how we got here. And this story works for these people, that story works for these. And the other interesting thing about origin stories, origin myths, is they all sound alike. Once you get past the superficial, they all got the same basic mechanics. God didn't create Adam and Eve for the Garden of Eden. If you were Greeks 2,500 years ago, you said Zeus created humans, man, and the gods did that after they battled with the Titans. Now, all of these stories have this, because it ain't but one set of people, ain't but one set of genetics. That's Homo sapien, okay? Now, there were other humanoid folks here, but they didn't make it, okay? The remaining, we're the result of the folks that survived, that made it, and quote, we're Homo sapiens, which, crazy as it sounds, means wise man, okay? And I'm still wondering how we came up, how anthropologists decided to call this species, this iteration of humanity, wise man. But we do have a rational facility, the ability to reason, if we can figure out how to manage our emotions and our instincts and everything and so without that next level of awareness, you get looped around in all these crazy ass stories, and people can make up stuff if they're good storytellers, and then people go believe it, okay? And you really organize the whole world around a series of myths that people internalize, and that becomes the operational reality. And it's got very little to do. Now, it is a reality, but it's got very little to do with the underlying physical realities of why we function the way we are. What Aristotle called, said man is a rational animal. And I would suggest that we have spent all our time focused on the rational and never understanding the animal part. And I would suggest that, like Robert Howland, the great science fiction novelist, that he said man is not a rational animal, man is a rationalizing animal. Okay, and so we make up stories to justify the reality that we want or that we find ourselves in, because we do have that need as a species. We have that the reason you can find God everywhere is because everywhere you'll find us, we always have the question: how did we get here? What's this about? How did it come? And you need an answer. And in lieu of some empirical basis, you reason to that. You can't prove it. You choose to believe it, and it's a rational belief. It just ain't empirically verifiable. And somebody else's rationalization of that is as, quote, legitimate as yours. And then it becomes about who is the strongest to impose their fiction on others. Because whoever can win that battle is now in charge of the reality that we all live in.
That is why we're in the state we're in today, because the victor has imposed their own set of principles on us that are far from the truth. Dr. Christmas, do you have any thoughts on that?
I excuse me. I agree with that 100%. I think that they have imposed their theory of the case on us, and we follow that theory of the case. And ultimately, we need to come up with our own theory of the case and what we need to do to advance ourselves. And it takes all of this information that we are explaining and talking about today to get us to that point. And we have to be determined to move our people to that point. We just cannot accept the existence that we have now. We have to challenge it. And we have to be the ones to challenge it. Because if we don't challenge it, it won't get challenged.
Not at all. Not at all. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to start the year off succinct. Yeah, we want to thank you for tuning in. And before we go, I want to ask if there are any final thoughts you gentlemen want to impose.
I think Gerald put a perfect period behind it.
I think so also. Dr. Alexander, anything?
Again, it's our work to do, and and we have to always be seeking right and correct information and answers, right? And that's a constant search, and have to understand that kind of regardless of our lot in life, we are always under fire in this place, to some degree. And so we have to move in that regard. Excuse me. Certainly, we can, take this time, this next week, everybody's going to be reflective about the life of Jimmy Carter. But what we have to do is think about that presidency in our social and political and historical context so that we composite and understand where we were before him, during him, and since, so that we can continue to strategize and be prepared to meet the next challenge.
Amen. And until next week, we'll sign off and thank you for engaging with us once again. And you all have an incredible week. Happy New Year. And once again, happy J5.